What happens to a human when the long road of life grows quiet? What becomes of the one who walked first, loved first, and fell first? And when the very first man closed his eyes for the last time, where did he go? Most people never ask that question. We speak of Adam often, yet we stop his story too early. We talk about the garden, the choice, the loss, then we move on, as if his life ended at exile. Yet Adam did not vanish when Eden faded from view. He lived, he aged, he carried memory. And one day, like every human who came after him, he lay down and did not rise again. That moment carries a quiet weight. The first human to be formed from the earth also became the first human to return to it. His story did not end with fruit or flame or angels at a gate. It ended the same way every life does, with stillness. Adam was not a symbol while he lived. He was a man. He worked the ground with hands that once touched untouched soil. He loved a woman who shared his exile. He watched children grow, argue, laugh, and wander away. He felt regret, not as an idea, but as a daily companion. Every sunrise reminded him of what had been lost. Every night carried the same thought: this world is not the one I remember. Scripture tells us he lived a long time. Genesis records that Adam lived for 930 years. That number sounds distant, almost unreal, yet length does not soften loss. Time does not erase memory. A long life only gives more space for reflection. Adam watched generations rise and fall. He buried children and grandchildren. He saw the cost of his choice play out again and again, not in stories, but in real faces. Modern people carry the same quiet fear Adam carried. We avoid thinking about the end. We distract ourselves. We build noise around our days. Yet at night, when the world slows, the same question returns: what happens when this stops? Adam lived closer to that question than anyone else. He had seen the beginning. He knew the world had not always been this way. Genesis chapters 1 through 5 move quickly, almost gently, over centuries. They tell us what happened, yet they leave much unsaid. They record lifespans, names, family lines. Then one short sentence appears, repeated again and again, and he died. Adam's line ends the same way. No ceremony, no detail, just silence. That silence invites thought. Adam knew death had entered the world through his disobedience. He carried that knowledge every day. When his body began to weaken, when strength left his hands, when the earth he once ruled grew heavy beneath his feet, he understood something no one before him had faced. He was about to cross into something unknown. The text does not describe fear in Adam's final days, yet fear often hides quietly. It does not shout, it waits. Adam had no stories of ancestors who went before him, no inherited wisdom about what comes after life ends. He stood at the edge of human experience, alone in that moment, yet deeply human. We often imagine Adam as distant, almost mythical. Scripture presents him differently. He names animals. He feels shame. He hides. He speaks. These are not the actions of a symbol. They are the actions of a man learning, failing, and enduring. When age finally settled over him, it did so slowly, the way it does with all people. Each day a little quieter, each night a little longer. Outside the garden, the world kept moving. Fields grew, children were born, work filled the hours. Yet Adam's body began to return to the ground from which it came, not suddenly, not violently, gently, as if the earth itself was calling him back. There is something deeply human in that image. We all move toward that same stillness, even if we pretend we are not. Adam's death connects ancient history to the present moment. The first man faced the same ending every person faces today. That shared fate binds humanity together across time. Scripture does not tell us what Adam thought in his final moments. It leaves space instead of answers. That space allows the listener to breathe slowly and sit with the weight of the moment. The one who heard God speak in the beginning now listened to silence. The one who named life now faced rest. His life did not end in drama. It ended in quiet, and perhaps that is the most honest ending of all. Many wonder why Scripture moves past this moment so quickly, perhaps because the question of what happens after death was never meant to be rushed, perhaps because some answers unfold slowly, like night settling over the land. Adam's story invites listening rather than certainty. As you hear this story, you may notice your own thoughts slowing. The question Adam faced is the same one people face now, lying awake in the dark, listening to the world grow quiet. Where do we go when the noise fades? What waits beyond the final moment? We will move carefully through that question, without hurry, without force. For now, let this opening moment rest with you. Let the story settle. And if you find comfort here, you are welcome to stay. You may subscribe to the channel if you wish, gently, without pressure. If it feels right, you can share your name and the city you are watching from, and even the time of day or night you are listening. Write it softly in the comments, as if leaving a note at the edge of the story. Now, let the quiet continue. The day did not announce itself. There were no signs written across the sky, no sudden hush falling over the land. Light moved as it always had, slow and steady, touching the fields, warming the soil, tracing the familiar shapes of a world Adam had known for centuries. His body had grown quiet long before that day arrived. Strength had loosened its hold, steps had shortened. The ground he once worked with ease now felt closer, heavier, more intimate. Adam rested where the earth felt familiar beneath him, not as a throne, not as a grave, but as ground he had known since the beginning. His hands, once firm and sure, lay open, empty, as if they no longer needed to hold anything. The long weight of living had settled gently into stillness. There was no struggle, no sharp edge, no moment of panic. Life did not leave him in a rush. It slowed, like evening light stretching across the land. Each moment became softer than the one before it. The world did not pull away from him. It remained close, quiet, patient. He had lived long enough to know that all things move toward rest. Crops rise and fall. Seasons return to themselves. Even the strongest trees lean with age. His body followed the same pattern. The rhythm that had carried him since his first awakening grew faint, then almost imperceptible. Adam had known the sound of God's voice in the earliest days. He had known laughter, sorrow, regret, and the ache of memory. All of that remained with him, not as noise, but as a calm awareness. Nothing needed to be solved. Nothing needed to be explained. The long story of his life did not demand a final sentence. The earth felt cool beneath him. Soil that once responded to his labor now welcomed his weight without resistance. It did not reject him. It did not pull him down. It simply held him, the way it had always done. Time stretched in a way that no longer felt measured. There was no urgency, no count of years left undone. The long arc of existence had completed itself quietly. Adam's body followed the same path as the dust from which it had come, not as punishment, not as loss, but as return. The first human to walk the land now lay within it. The first to name living creatures now shared their stillness. The first to feel exile now felt no distance at all. The ground did not remember his mistakes. It only recognized him. No voice interrupted the moment. No vision opened before his eyes. The world did not rush to mark the crossing. His children and their children would speak of him in names and lines. Yet this moment belonged only to him. Life loosened its grip with patience. Each rise of the chest grew shallower, slower, until movement itself felt unnecessary. There was no fear present, only release. The body understood what the mind no longer needed to carry. Adam did not fight the quiet. He did not cling to memory or resist the pull of rest. He had seen enough to know that holding on forever was never the design. The world was shaped for cycles, not permanence. Around him, the land remained unchanged. Wind passed through leaves. Light shifted across stone. Somewhere beyond sight, others lived their ordinary moments, unaware that a threshold had been crossed. History often moves this way, unnoticed, without sound. The earth received him as it had once given him form, slowly, kindly, without judgment. Flesh returned to stillness. Weight settled. The shape of a body became part of the landscape it once ruled. In that moment, something unprecedented had occurred. Death had claimed its first human witness, not as an enemy standing over him, not as a force tearing something away, but as a quiet closing of a long-held book. A life had reached its final page without being torn. Adam did not step into darkness. He stepped out of movement. The difference matters. Darkness suggests loss. Stillness suggests rest. The world did not collapse around him. It continued, carrying forward the echo of his existence in every life that followed. This was not a dramatic ending. It did not need to be. The weight of the moment rested in its simplicity. The first human crossed a boundary no one before him had crossed, and he did so without sound. The ground bore witness. Stone and soil remembered his shape. The land that once heard his footsteps now felt his quiet presence. In time, even that would fade, yet the moment itself remained sealed within the long memory of the world. Nothing was taken from him violently. Nothing was torn loose. Life loosened itself and stepped aside. The body followed what it had always known how to do. In that stillness, the story did not stop. It paused, a pause deep enough to hold centuries, a pause wide enough to gather countless lives into its silence. The first human had crossed into rest, and the earth held him without question. When life grows quiet, questions begin to surface that daylight often keeps hidden. Ancient people did not imagine death as a sudden fall into chaos or flame. They spoke of a place beneath the noise of the world, a place reached when movement ended and voices faded. Scripture gives this place a name, Sheol. It appears softly across the pages of the Old Testament, never announced, never dramatized, simply present. Sheol was understood as the realm of the dead, though not in the way later generations would picture reward or punishment. It was described as depth, as still ground, as a shadowed space where activity no longer ruled. Job spoke of it when pain pressed too heavily on his days. In his words, Sheol appeared as rest from labor, a place where the weary lie down together and the restless no longer disturb the quiet. There was no language of torment in his description, only release from striving. The Psalms mention Sheol often, usually in tones of humility and reflection. David spoke of it as a place where praise does not rise and sound does not travel, not because of suffering, but because movement itself has ceased. The world above continues, while beneath it lies a calm depth untouched by urgency. This idea shaped how ancient listeners understood death. It was not an enemy screaming victory. It was a boundary crossed quietly. Sheol was not presented as a final destination. It was a holding place, a pause rather than an ending. People believed that all who died went there, the faithful and the broken alike. Kings and servants, the remembered and the forgotten, all shared the same stillness. This belief removed hierarchy from death. Titles dissolved, achievements faded, only existence remained. The language used around Sheol often mirrored rest. Scripture compared death to lying down, to being gathered, to joining those who had already gone ahead. These were gentle images, chosen carefully. Fear was not the dominant emotion. Acceptance was. Death was understood as something woven into the order of life after exile, not as a violent interruption. This understanding shaped how people lived. Knowing that Sheol awaited everyone created a sense of humility. Life mattered deeply because it moved quickly and did not return in the same form. At the same time, death was not imagined as a place of endless pain. It was a space where striving ended. Adam, as the first to cross into this quiet, would have carried no inherited fears about what lay beyond. The traditions that later generations formed grew from this original crossing. The stillness he entered became the stillness others expected. In many passages, Sheol is described as deep earth. The same ground that receives the body is connected to the unseen place where life withdraws. This connection mattered to ancient minds. It tied death to creation itself. What was formed from the earth returned to it, both seen and unseen. The Psalms describe Sheol as silent, not empty. Silence does not mean absence, it means rest from sound. In that silence, time does not press forward. Waiting replaces urgency. The inner life remains aware without effort. This idea stands far from images of terror that later developed. Early scripture did not push fear into the center of death. It acknowledged loss and sorrow, yet it left space for calm. Even grief was allowed to soften over time. Sheol was not heaven, and it was not judgment. It was unfinished space, a place before resolution, a holding pattern woven into the larger story of humanity. This is why many biblical writers spoke of waiting rather than ending. In Job's longing, Sheol appeared as a place where pain loosens its grip. In David's prayers, it appeared as a reminder of human limits. In both, it remained free of cruelty. It was not meant to threaten, it was meant to explain. Death, then, was often compared to rest at night. The body lies still, awareness quiets. Mourning does not belong to the sleeper. Something similar shaped how people imagined the unseen afterlife. Not fear, but quiet waiting. This way of seeing death shaped trust. Life had meaning without needing immediate reward beyond it. Justice did not need to unfold instantly. Time itself held space for future movement. Adam's crossing into this stillness would have shaped every generation that followed. He entered without map or story, yet his path became the first pattern. Others would follow the same quiet descent, not chased, not dragged, simply carried by the natural close of living. Sheol was spoken of with reverence, not dread. It marked the boundary where human effort ends and waiting begins. It held no promises, yet it held no threats. It simply was. In that place, motion pauses, voices cease, struggle loosens. The world above continues its turning, unaware of the calm beneath its surface. The ancient understanding of death rested in this image, not disappearance, not punishment, but a deep quiet where time stretches thin and rest replaces striving. The world did not stop when Adam's breath faded. Morning still arrived, light still moved across the land, children were still born, and fields still needed tending. Life continued, not with celebration, not with awareness of what had been lost, but with the steady rhythm of survival. Humanity learned to walk forward without its first father, carrying his memory without fully understanding its weight. Adam had been a living anchor. His presence connected every generation to the beginning. When he spoke, his words carried the echo of a world no one else had seen. When he told stories, they were not legends, they were memories. After his passing, that living connection ended. The beginning became distant, softened by time, carried only through retelling. Those who remained felt the absence in quiet ways. There was no public moment that marked the shift, no line drawn between before and after, yet something had changed. The one who named the world was no longer there to remind it of its origin. Families continued to grow, names filled the earth, work filled the days. Yet death moved through these lives with increasing familiarity. What had once been unknown now became expected. Each generation encountered the same stillness Adam had entered, not as a surprise, but as an inherited reality. Death did not arrive loudly. It did not sweep through humanity in a single wave. It moved slowly, one life at a time. A parent, a sibling, a child. Each loss carried its own weight, yet together they formed a pattern. Mortality became woven into daily life. People learned to grieve. They learned to bury. They learned to remember. They learned that every life, no matter how long, reached a moment of rest. This knowledge shaped how they loved and how they feared. Adam's choice did not live only in memory. It lived in bodies that aged, in strength that faded, in days that ended. The world bore the mark of his disobedience not through punishment alone, but through limitation. Life was still beautiful, yet it no longer lasted without end. Children grew up hearing fragments of the old story, a garden, a tree, a command, a loss. These fragments shaped their understanding of themselves. They lived with the awareness that something had been broken before they arrived. That awareness settled quietly into the human heart. It did not always take the form of guilt. Often it appeared as longing, a sense that life pointed towards something it could not fully reach, a feeling that the world was close to whole, yet not complete. Each generation carried this inheritance without choosing it. They were born into a world shaped by a moment they did not witness. They lived under conditions they did not create. This shared experience bound humanity together more tightly than blood alone. As people multiplied, distance grew between them and Adam's voice. His stories were repeated, then shortened, then reshaped. Memory became tradition. Tradition became structure. The living man became a name spoken in lists and records, yet the effects of his life remained present. Work carried strain. Relationships carried tension. Joy carried fragility. Every birth carried hope alongside the quiet knowledge that life would not remain unchanged. Death became familiar without becoming normal. Each loss reopened the same question Adam once faced alone. Where does life go when it leaves the body? No answer arrived immediately. Waiting became part of the human experience. Communities formed rituals to honor the dead. They gathered. They spoke names. They touched the ground. These acts did not remove sorrow, yet they gave it shape. Grief became shared rather than isolated. The spread of death across generations did not harden humanity. It softened it. People learned empathy through loss. They learned tenderness through shared mourning. Even pain became a teacher. Adam's absence was felt most deeply in moments of uncertainty. Without the first witness to creation, humanity relied on fragments and trust. Faith grew not from certainty, but from hope. Life outside the garden required resilience. People learned to build, to protect, to endure. They learned to live fully within limits. The knowledge of death sharpened the value of time. Children watched elders age. Elders watched children outlive them. This cycle shaped the emotional landscape of humanity. Love deepened because it was temporary. Moments mattered because they did not repeat. Adam's legacy moved through humanity quietly, not as a curse shouted from the sky, but as a reality carried in flesh and breath. Each person inherited both the beauty of life and the certainty of its ending. The world he left behind was not abandoned. It was entrusted to those who followed. Humanity learned to move forward without full answers, guided by memory, hope, and the shared experience of living under the same sky. The earth continued to receive bodies gently, one after another. Names were spoken, then faded. Stories were told, then reshaped. The beginning grew distant, yet its influence remained close. In this way, Adam's life continued to shape the world long after his passing, not through command, not through presence, but through the shared condition of humanity itself. Life went on, carrying both the weight of loss and the quiet persistence of hope. The moment of death was not imagined as a violent tearing away in the oldest traditions, but as a quiet threshold where unseen beings stood patiently. Ancient Jewish writings describe angels not as distant watchers but as attendants who appear when human breath begins to thin. For Adam, whose life began directly from the breath of God, the ending of that breath carried a unique weight. He was not only a man dying, he was the first to experience the mystery every child of dust would one day face. The world around him had already grown familiar with decay, yet his passing held a stillness unlike any other, as if creation itself paused to witness what would happen when the first formed returned to silence. Among these traditions, the archangel Michael is often named as the one who stands nearest to the soul at death. Michael is not portrayed as harsh or frightening, but as steady and luminous, bearing a presence that calms rather than commands. He is called the guardian of Israel, the defender of humanity, and in some texts, the guide who leads souls from the world of breath into the world of waiting. For Adam, Michael's appearance would not have felt foreign. Adam had once walked with God in the cool of the day, had heard divine voices without terror. Even after exile, something of that familiarity lingered deep within him, and the angelic presence at death would have felt like a reminder of a long-lost closeness rather than an intrusion. Yet Adam was still human, shaped by years of toil, sorrow, and memory. Fear did not vanish simply because angels were near. Ancient writings often humanize Adam at the end of his life, portraying him as weary and reflective, carrying the accumulated weight of centuries. He had seen children born and buried, had watched the earth absorb the bodies of those who came from him. Now his own body weakened, his breath shortened, and the ground he once named seemed to call him back. In that moment, fear was not terror but uncertainty, the quiet question of what lay beyond the final heartbeat. The angels at the threshold were not there to force or rush. Jewish mystical traditions suggest that death unfolds gently, almost respectfully, especially for those whose lives were deeply tied to the divine story. Michael's role was not to judge but to accompany, to stand between the soul and the unknown like a steady bridge. Adam's surrender, then, was not an act of defeat but of trust. He had once reached out his hand in disobedience, and now he reached inward, loosening his grip on breath itself. The angelic presence did not erase regret, but it softened it, wrapping even remorse in a sense of order and meaning. Some traditions describe angels speaking softly at the moment of death, reminding the soul of its origin. Adam, more than any other, would have remembered that origin not as a story but as an experience. He had felt the warmth of divine breath enter lifeless clay. As that same breath began to withdraw, the angels served as witnesses, ensuring that the return was not chaotic. Michael, whose name means "who is like God," stood as a reminder that even in death, the soul does not become divine, nor is it abandoned. It remains a created thing, guided and held. Adam's fear, according to these traditions, was not of punishment but of separation. Death meant leaving behind the world he had watched unfold from its earliest days. He had seen rivers change course, languages form, and generations forget the sound of Eden. To step beyond that was to step into stillness, into a place where the senses no longer anchor the self. The angels did not deny this fear. Instead, they acknowledged it through presence. Silence itself became a form of reassurance, suggesting that nothing needed to be solved in that moment, only accepted. The surrender of Adam is often portrayed as gradual, rather than sudden. His breath slowed, his body grew heavy, and the boundary between waking and sleeping blurred. Death, in these traditions, is frequently described as a deeper sleep, and angels are those who guard sleep. Michael's role as guide aligns with this imagery, not pulling Adam into darkness but allowing him to drift. The soul's departure was not described as painful, but as a release, like unclenching a hand that had held onto time for too long. There is also a tenderness in how these traditions imagine the angels interacting with Adam's memory. His life contained both glory and loss, obedience and failure. At the threshold of death, angels are said to gather the fragments of a life, not to weigh them harshly but to preserve them. Michael's presence symbolized continuity, the assurance that Adam's story did not end in meaninglessness. Even exile and mortality were now part of a larger design that Adam himself could not fully see while alive. Humanizing Adam in this way makes his surrender profoundly relatable. He was not a mythic figure immune to fear. He was an old man facing the unknown. The angels did not demand courage from him. Courage emerged naturally through companionship. The idea that no human crosses death entirely alone is central to these traditions. Adam, the first to live, was also the first to discover that even death is not solitary. As Adam's soul loosened from the body, the earth remained close. Some writings suggest that angels pause at this moment, allowing the soul to recognize the separation. The body, once animated by divine breath, now rested fully in the dust. Michael did not hurry the soul away, respecting the gravity of leaving the physical world. This pause honors the human experience, acknowledging that the body mattered, that life in flesh was not a mistake but a sacred phase. The threshold of death, then, becomes a meeting place rather than a dividing line. Angels stand between time and eternity, not as barriers but as guides. For Adam, this meeting carried a special symmetry. He had entered life through divine intervention, and he left life accompanied by divine messengers. The circle was not perfect, but it was complete enough to hold meaning. In these ancient visions, Adam's surrender is quiet, almost intimate. There is no thunder, no cosmic upheaval. The angels do not announce themselves with spectacle. They simply are. Michael's steady presence allows Adam to release his final breath without panic. Fear fades not because answers are given, but because trust takes root in the silence. The soul, having borne the weight of history, is allowed to rest. This portrayal reshapes death from an enemy into a passage overseen by care. Adam's experience becomes the template for all humanity, suggesting that the first human was not abandoned at the end, and neither are those who follow. Angels at the threshold do not erase the mystery of death, but they soften its edge. Adam's final act is not one of rebellion, but of yielding, guided by unseen hands that honor both his humanity and his origin. The ancient traditions do not leave Adam in silence alone. Even as his strength faded and the world around him grew quieter, there is a persistent thread in lost texts that speaks of a promise given not with thunder, but with gentleness. In writings such as the life of Adam and Eve, hope does not arrive as an announcement meant to overwhelm fear. It comes softly, almost like breath itself, woven into sorrow rather than replacing it. Adam is not told that death will disappear, nor that exile will be undone quickly. Instead, he is given something smaller and yet deeper, the assurance that what was broken will not remain broken forever. In these texts, Adam's awareness of the future does not come from visions of glory, but from whispered understanding. He is described as a man who has carried regret for centuries, watching the consequences of his choice ripple outward through his children and their children. Death has become familiar to him, not as an abstraction, but as a repeated loss. When hope is finally spoken near the end of his life, it is not framed as reward, but as mercy. The promise does not erase his sorrow, it sits beside it, giving sorrow a horizon rather than a wall. The life of Adam and Eve tells of Adam's longing to return to the place he once knew, Though he understands that Eden itself is no longer accessible, he does not ask for restoration for himself. Instead, his concern turns outward, toward those who will come after him, those who will inherit both his breath and his burden. The promise addresses this concern. It speaks of a future act, not performed by Adam, but by one who will come from his line. This future figure is not immediately named or described in triumphal language. The text allows the promise to remain partially veiled, as if clarity itself would be too heavy for a dying man. Hope, in these writings, is introduced through patience. Adam is told that healing will come after many days, a phrase that stretches time beyond any single lifespan. This is not the kind of hope that energizes the body, it is the kind that settles the soul. Adam does not rise renewed, nor does he suddenly escape death. Instead, the promise functions like a quiet light placed far in the distance, visible but unreachable. It does not deny the darkness of the present moment, but it prevents that darkness from becoming absolute. What makes this promise remarkable is its tone. There is no celebration, no sense of victory. The Redeemer is not described as a conqueror in the way human imagination often desires. Rather, the promise is framed as a correction, a healing of what has gone wrong. The fall introduced disorder, and the future will introduce restoration, but gently, through obedience rather than force. Adam, who once acted by reaching prematurely, is now taught that redemption will come through waiting. In the lost texts, this promise is sometimes delivered through angelic mediation. Angels do not explain every detail, nor do they satisfy Adam's curiosity. They speak with restraint, emphasizing that knowledge itself was once the source of his downfall. What Adam is given now is not information, but reassurance. He is told that the earth he will soon return to is not abandoned, that history is not merely a cycle of decay. Even though generations will continue to suffer, their suffering will not be meaningless. Adam receives this promise not as a man standing tall, but as one lying close to the ground, weakened and aware of his limits. This posture matters. Hope is not offered at a moment of strength, but at the edge of helplessness. The future Redeemer is not described as undoing Adam's death, but as transforming the meaning of death itself. This distinction is subtle but profound. Death remains, but it will no longer be the final word. The life of Adam and Eve portrays Adam listening rather than speaking in these moments. His role is not to negotiate or question, but to receive. This reflects a reversal of the earlier story, where Adam reached for what was not yet his. Now, he accepts what he cannot control. Hope, in this sense, becomes an act of humility. It requires Adam to trust that what he could not fix will be addressed by another, at another time. The promise also carries an emotional softness that contrasts with the severity of Adam's earlier experiences. Exile from Eden was sharp and immediate, marked by boundaries and loss. This future hope is slow and patient, unfolding across generations. It respects human fragility, acknowledging that redemption cannot be forced upon a wounded world. Adam is not told when the Redeemer will come, only that he will. This lack of specificity keeps the promise from becoming a calculation. It remains relational rather than strategic. Adam's response to the promise is not described as joy in the conventional sense. There is no laughter or celebration. Instead, there is a deepening calm. The text suggests that Adam's sorrow does not disappear, but it becomes quieter, less restless. Regret no longer circles endlessly within him. It has somewhere to rest. The promise allows Adam to release the illusion that he must carry the weight of history alone. This hope is also communal rather than individual. Adam is not promised personal restoration, but generational healing. The Redeemer will come for humanity as a whole, not for Adam alone. This shifts Adam's perspective at the end of his life. His story no longer ends with himself. It extends forward, carried by descendants he will never meet. In this way, hope becomes an inheritance, passed quietly rather than proclaimed loudly. The promise does not deny the long stretch of suffering that will follow Adam's death. The texts are clear that violence, corruption, and sorrow will continue. Hope does not function as an escape from reality. Instead, it introduces meaning into endurance. Adam is allowed to die knowing that endurance itself will one day be answered. This knowledge does not remove pain, but it changes how pain is held. In the final moments described in these lost writings, Adam's attention shifts away from himself. His concern becomes less about what he has lost and more about what will one day be restored. This shift is subtle, almost imperceptible, but it marks the deepest transformation of his life. The man who once grasped for immediate fulfillment now rests in delayed fulfillment. Hope, whispered rather than shouted, reshapes his final awareness. The Redeemer, still distant and unnamed, exists for Adam as a promise rather than a presence. And yet, that promise is enough to soften death itself. Adam does not cross into silence believing that the story has failed. He crosses knowing that the story continues without him. The whisper he carries into stillness is not one of triumph, but of trust, a quiet assurance that what began in a garden will not end in dust alone. Time no longer moves the way it once did. After Adam's final breath, after the earth closed gently over his body, something shifts that words struggle to hold. The long counting of days and years loosens its grip. What once took effort to endure now passes without weight. Centuries drift like a single breath exhaled and forgotten. For Adam, there is no awareness of seasons turning or generations rising and falling above the soil. The long sleep beyond time is not marked by darkness or light, but by a deep, unmeasured stillness. In this rest, Adam does not feel alone. The ancient imagination often speaks of souls gathered, not crowded or restless, but simply present with one another. There is no pressing need to speak, no urgency to explain stories. Each soul carries its own memory, yet those memories no longer ache. They rest the way tired hands rest when they finally release what they have been holding for too long. Adam is among them, not as a ruler or a father figure, but as one soul among many, equal in stillness. There are no clocks here, no rising sun to announce beginnings, no setting sun to suggest endings. Time does not stretch forward or backward, it settles. Without the sun, there is no shadow, and without shadow, there is no sense of passing hours. The waiting is not impatient because there is nothing to measure it against. Adam does not count how long he has been resting. He does not wonder when it will end. Waiting, here, is not a pause between actions. It is the state itself. This long sleep is often misunderstood as emptiness, but the traditions speak of it as fullness without motion. Adam's thoughts do not race, yet they do not disappear. They soften. The sharp edges of memory become smooth, like stones shaped by water over time. The garden no longer torments him with longing, nor does the moment of disobedience replay endlessly. These memories remain, but they no longer wound. They are held at a distance, observed without pain. Souls rest together, yet individuality is not erased. Adam does not dissolve into a collective presence. He remains himself, but without the burdens that once defined him. Identity here is quieter, stripped of roles and expectations. He is not the first man or the fallen one. He is simply Adam, a being shaped by breath, now resting in silence. Others around him share this same simplicity. There is no hierarchy, no comparison, only coexistence. In this place of waiting, there is no hunger or thirst. The body's needs no longer dictate awareness. Adam does not feel cold or warmth. Sensation itself seems to have settled into a gentle neutrality. This absence is not frightening. It feels like being wrapped in something vast and unmoving. The rest is deep enough that fear cannot reach it. Fear requires anticipation, and anticipation requires time. Here, neither finds a foothold. The long sleep stretches across generations without effort. Adam does not observe his descendants struggling above, nor does he watch the slow unfolding of history. Knowledge of events does not intrude into this rest. The waiting is protected from interruption. Even as violence spreads, as empires rise and fall, the souls remain untouched by urgency. This separation is not abandonment, it is shelter. Ancient reflections describe this state as a kind of Sabbath without end. Just as the seventh day was not defined by work, this rest is not defined by progress. Adam does not strive to become anything else. There is no sense that he must prepare or improve. The waiting itself is enough. In this, the long sleep feels like a return to something older than effort, older even than the garden, a stillness woven into creation before motion began. Adam's awareness, if it can be called that, drifts gently. Sometimes it feels like remembering without images, knowing without words. There is a sense that something lies ahead, but it does not press forward demanding attention. The promise whispered to him before death remains. but it rests quietly, like a seed buried deep beneath the soil. It does not sprout here. It waits. Souls resting together share this same orientation toward the future without anxiety. There is no discussion of when or how fulfillment will come. The waiting is communal, yet silent. If there is communication, it is not through speech. It is more like a shared stillness, a mutual understanding that does not need to be articulated. Adam does not feel isolated, yet he does not feel crowded. Presence itself becomes gentle. Without sun or stars, there is no sense of direction. Adam does not face forward or backward. Spatial awareness loses meaning. This does not create confusion, it creates peace. Orientation matters only when movement is required. Here, movement is unnecessary. The soul rests where it is, complete in its waiting. The passing of centuries does not weigh on Adam, but it does shape the stillness itself. The rest deepens as time unfolds above, even though that unfolding is not perceived directly. It is as though the weight of history presses downward, not as burden, but as insulation. The more the world struggles, the quieter this resting place becomes. Adam's long sleep grows deeper as humanity's restlessness grows louder elsewhere. This waiting is not despair. It does not feel like being forgotten or set aside. There is a quiet assurance woven into the stillness, a sense that rest itself is purposeful. Adam does not understand the mechanics of what will come, but understanding is no longer required. Trust replaces knowledge. The need to grasp or explain dissolves completely. In this sleep beyond time, Adam's story is not paused. It is held, like a book placed gently on a shelf, not closed forever, but waiting to be opened again. The pages are not being read now, but they are not lost. The long silence does not erase meaning. It preserves it. Souls resting together share this preservation. Each story remains intact, unhurried, untouched by decay. Adam's long sleep becomes part of a much larger stillness, one that stretches across ages without strain. There is no sense of boredom, because boredom requires awareness of passing time. Here, awareness floats free of measurement. The waiting continues, not as anticipation, but as being. Adam does not know how long he has been here, and he does not wonder. The quiet holds him completely. There are no dreams in the way the living understand dreams. There are no images flickering behind closed eyes. Instead, there is a depth of rest so complete that even imagination rests. This is Adam's long sleep beyond time, a waiting that feels less like delay and more like shelter, a stillness where centuries pass unnoticed, where souls rest together without words, where no clocks tick and no sun rises, and where the promise of what is to come lies gently beneath the surface, undisturbed, patient, and alive. The stillness where Adam rests is not heaven. That truth settles quietly, without sharp edges. Heaven remains above, untouched, not out of cruelty, not out of distance, but because something in the story is not yet complete. The closing of heaven is not a slammed door. It is a pause held with intention. Adam senses this without bitterness. The silence around him carries meaning, even when it offers no explanation. From the earliest pages of Scripture, heaven is spoken of as a place of fullness, a dwelling of unbroken closeness with God. Yet after the first disobedience, that closeness shifts, not erased, not forgotten, but altered. The garden once allowed heaven and earth to touch freely. Afterward, a veil settles between them. Adam's rest takes place on the earthward side of that veil, not because he is unloved, but because love itself is guarding something deeper. Justice and mercy stand here, not as opposing forces, but as two steady hands holding the same truth. Justice remembers what was broken. Mercy remembers why it still matters. Adam carries both realities within him. He knows his choice changed the shape of the world. He also knows the voice that spoke to him never withdrew its care. Heaven remaining closed is not punishment alone. It is protection for a story that must unfold fully. Adam cannot enter heaven yet because heaven is not only a reward, it is a restoration. It is a place where nothing fractured can remain fractured. The world Adam left behind still bears the marks of his decision. Violence spreads quietly through generations. Death becomes familiar. Sorrow finds a home in human hearts. Heaven does not ignore these things. It waits for them to be healed, not covered over. The ancient writings hint that heaven holds a kind of completeness that earth has not yet reached. Adam's presence there would feel unfinished, like a sentence ending before its meaning is clear. The separation honors the weight of what happened. It does not rush toward resolution. The story of humanity must be lived through, not skipped. Adam rests with the awareness that something greater than his own fate is at work. His story is bound to the stories of those who came after him. Heaven does not open for one while many remain bound to pain below. There is a quiet solidarity in this waiting. Adam's rest carries the shape of shared destiny. What happens to humanity happens to him as well. Justice remembers the words spoken in the garden, the consequences named without anger. Mercy remembers the promise spoken softly, the one that hinted at healing rather than erasure. Heaven remains closed because that promise has not yet taken form. The remedy has been spoken, but not yet revealed. Adam waits not in fear, but in alignment with that slow unfolding. There is also a truth about holiness woven into this waiting. Heaven is not merely higher ground. It is a realm where life flows without interruption. Death cannot pass its threshold. Adam, marked by death, cannot cross until death itself is addressed. This is not rejection, it is order. Life does not absorb death without first transforming it. The waiting honors the seriousness of what it means to return to God's presence. The garden taught Adam that closeness requires trust. That trust was broken, not beyond repair, but not lightly restored. Heaven remains closed because restoration demands more than regret. It requires renewal that reaches every layer of creation. Adam's rest reflects this truth. He is not tormented by exclusion. He is sheltered by timing. The silence around him feels intentional, shaped by wisdom rather than delay. Heaven is not withholding itself out of distance. It is holding itself back until it can receive humanity whole. The unfinished story of humanity stretches far beyond Adam's lifetime. Wars rise, songs are written, children are born who never knew the garden. Each life adds another thread to the human story. Heaven remains attentive to all of it. Adam senses that his rest is connected to every breath taken above. The waiting gathers meaning with each passing generation. Mercy does not rush justice, and justice does not cancel mercy. They move together, slowly, deliberately. Heaven remaining closed reflects that measured movement. Adam's sleep carries this balance within it. He does not plead to enter. He waits, trusting that the timing holds purpose. The ancient imagination often pictures heaven leaning close, watching the earth with patient care. Adam feels that closeness without crossing into it. The separation does not feel empty. It feels expectant, like the space between words in a sentence that has not yet been spoken aloud. There is no resentment in Adam's waiting. The rest allows him to release the need for answers. He does not demand to know when heaven will open. The desire for control has long since faded. Trust replaces it quietly. Trust in the voice that once walked with him in the garden, and that has never truly left. The closed heaven also speaks to the value of the human story itself. Earth is not abandoned or dismissed. The waiting affirms that what happens here matters. Adam's life mattered. So does the life of every descendant who walks the soil after him. Heaven waits because earth still carries unfinished meaning. Adam's rest becomes a form of witness. His sleep says that the story is still being written, that healing is not rushed, that redemption respects time, pain, and growth. Heaven remaining closed is not absence, it is patience shaped by love. As Adam rests, the silence continues to hold him. Heaven stays above, not distant, but reserved. The veil remains, thin yet firm. The waiting stretches on, not as delay, but as preparation. The story of humanity continues to move forward, slowly shaping the moment when heaven and earth will no longer need to remain apart. The place where Adam's body came to rest carries a quiet gravity in ancient memory. Long before stone markers or carved names, burial was an act of care rather than display. The earth itself became a shelter, receiving what it had once given. Adam's body, shaped from dust, returned to dust without resistance. There was no ceremony meant to impress, no gathering meant to be remembered. The ground opened, and the first human form was laid down gently, as if the earth recognized its own. Early traditions speak of burial as a return rather than an ending. To place a body into the soil was to trust that the ground was not an enemy. Adam's burial would have carried this meaning deeply. The same soil that once grew fruit under his hands now held him in stillness. This resting place did not belong to him alone. It became part of the land's memory. a quiet point where human life first completed its full arc. As generations passed, stories gathered around the place where Adam's body rested, not because the location demanded attention, but because meaning tends to gather where beginnings and endings meet. The ground that held Adam came to symbolize more than death. It stood as a reminder that human life, no matter how long or complex, always bends back toward the earth. Burial traditions grew around this understanding, shaped by respect rather than fear. Some ancient voices placed Adam's resting place near the center of the world as they understood it, not for glory, but for balance. The first human laid to rest at a point where earth and meaning seemed to meet. This idea carried forward quietly, shaping how later generations imagined sacred ground. The land itself became a witness, holding stories without speaking them aloud. Over time, another name became tied to this place: Golgotha, a hill associated with skulls, with death visible rather than hidden. The symbolism is heavy yet spoken softly, a place of exposed bone, of human fragility laid bare. In some traditions, Golgotha was believed to mark the ground where Adam's skull rested. Not his whole body, just the reminder of mortality, lifted slightly above the earth, visible to the sky. The image of Adam's skull beneath Golgotha does not shout its meaning, it waits. A skull carries no voice, no expression, only the shape that once held thought and breath. To imagine it resting beneath that hill is to sit with the reality that all human life passes through the same narrow door. The first human and the last share the same fate in the soil. This imagery grew richer as later events unfolded. Golgotha became associated with another body laid upon wood, another life given back to the earth. The weight of these layered stories rests quietly. Adam's skull beneath the place of execution suggests continuity rather than contrast. What began with dust returns to dust, yet meaning does not disappear with it. Burial traditions often speak of covering, of shielding the body from the elements. In Adam's case, the earth itself performed this act. There is tenderness in this image. The ground does not reject the body placed within it. It closes gently, holding without judgment. This act becomes a silent promise that nothing given to the earth is truly lost to memory. The skull imagery carries a different kind of stillness. A skull is exposed, truth. It hides nothing. To place Adam's skull beneath Golgotha is to say that human mortality stands at the center of the story, not pushed to the margins. Death is not a mistake to be concealed. It is a reality to be faced, understood, and held with care. In ancient thought, bones carried identity. They were believed to hold the essence of a person's life, even after flesh returned to soil. Adam's skull, then, represented the enduring trace of humanity's first breath. Its placement beneath Golgotha tied the beginning of human life to a moment of profound suffering and hope. Not loudly, not triumphantly, but quietly, like a thread woven through time. The ground itself becomes a participant in this story. Earth holds Adam. Earth witnesses later blood spilled above. Earth absorbs both without protest. The soil does not choose sides. It receives everything placed upon it. This quiet impartiality gives burial its sacred weight. Adam's resting place becomes a foundation, not only of human mortality, but of meaning shaped slowly across generations. As burial customs developed, people returned again and again to the idea that where a body rests matters, not for power, but for memory. Adam's body resting in the earth made every grave that followed a reflection of his own. Each burial echoed that first return, reminding humanity that no life stands alone in its ending. The symbolism of Golgotha layered onto this understanding added depth rather than closure. The Hill of Skulls did not erase Adam's story. It carried it forward. The exposed bone beneath the cross spoke without sound. This is what it means to be human, from first breath to final stillness. Dust shaped into life, life laid back into dust. This imagery does not rush toward resolution. It lingers. Adam's body resting in the earth does not demand explanation. It invites reflection. The ground where he lay becomes a quiet meeting place between beginnings and endings, between innocence lost and hope waiting to be fulfilled. The place where Adam's body rested is not marked by stone that still stands. It is marked by story, by the slow gathering of meaning over time. Burial traditions remember him each time earth receives another body. Golgotha remembers him each time mortality is confronted without turning away. The skull beneath the hill remains unseen, yet its presence shapes the way the story is told. In this way, Adam's resting place continues to speak, not through words, but through silence. The earth holds him still, the hill stands above, and the long thread connecting dust, death, and hope stretches quietly through the ground beneath every human step. The world that had long known shadow felt a shift, subtle as the first blush of dawn over quiet hills. Light entered, not with a shout, but with a gentle unfolding, as though the cosmos itself exhaled after centuries of holding its breath. The long silence, where Adam and countless souls had rested beyond time, began to shimmer faintly, not immediately breaking, but stretching the stillness, warming it in a way that had not existed before. This was not a storm of revelation. It was a slow, patient illumination, a soft whisper of hope that reached every shadowed corner without disturbing the calm. The silence had been profound. Millennia had passed, and yet it had been a silence filled with watching, waiting, and understanding in ways unseen. Adam's long sleep, the waiting of souls in Sheol, the quiet separation of heaven from the world, all these things existed in a kind of suspended attention, waiting for a spark that could begin to bridge the distance. When that light arrived, it was like a brush of warmth across skin that had long forgotten sunlight. It did not demand recognition. It simply entered, touching what had been dark and preparing the stage for what was to come. There was a sense that heaven, long poised above the world, leaned closer, not yet open, not yet revealing all of its splendor. It moved quietly in anticipation. The arrival of this light seemed to ripple through creation itself, touching skies, waters, and earth in a harmonious cadence. Trees, hills, rivers, these ordinary forms of life seemed to register the change, as though every molecule of the world recognized a subtle alteration in the divine rhythm. Adam, still resting in his long sleep, would have felt it as a quiet stirring, a gentle reminder that the story did not end in silence. The approach of this light is described in ancient imaginations with restraint, as though exaggeration would miss its truth. It did not blaze like the sun at noon, nor did it crack the sky with thunder. It was measured, gradual, allowing creation to notice without being overwhelmed. Light, in this telling, is almost like music, soft, resonant, and capable of reaching even the most still corners. The darkness had not been evil, merely waiting, and now waiting was being acknowledged, lightly and tenderly, as if the world itself were being invited to awaken. This light carried with it a sense of readiness. Heaven did not open immediately, but it began to move in alignment with the unfolding of time. Gates shifted subtly. Doors that had been closed began to lean, not with force, but with expectation. The boundary between the eternal and the temporal felt less rigid. There was still distance, still waiting, but it was a waiting that had begun to bend toward meeting, a preparation that spoke of patience and care rather than urgency. The souls resting quietly in Sheol, including Adam, were part of this quiet movement. They did not rise with sudden knowledge, nor did they feel compelled to act. The light entered their space like a gentle breath, touching without burning, illuminating without glare. Awareness began to return softly, as though the long sleep itself had been attuned to this eventual illumination. The first man, lying quietly in the earth, would have felt the presence of something beyond comprehension, something that whispered of renewal and continuation without demanding understanding. It is striking to consider that this arrival of light is not presented as triumph or spectacle. The story does not shout. It whispers, letting perception adjust slowly. Even the smallest sounds of creation, the rustle of leaves, the trickle of water, the faint movements of wind across hills carry hints of the change. These whispers do not explain themselves. They are not meant to be grasped fully by the mind, only sensed and allowed to shift the soul's awareness. The world itself participates in this awakening, stretching gently into its new rhythm. The way light breaks silence is gradual and layered. First, it touches corners of awareness that had lain dormant. Memories that once hovered like fragile threads begin to stir. Hope, long quieted into patience, moves without insistence. A sense of timing begins to re-enter the consciousness of humanity. This is not a forceful correction, nor a sudden unveiling. It is more like a soft turning of the sky toward the dawn, measured, deliberate, and tender. The arrival of this light carries with it the softest echo of promise, a hint that the closed gates of heaven are not permanent. They do not open yet, but the act of illumination itself begins the preparation. Walls that have held back full access to the eternal seem less rigid. The separation between what is earthly and what is heavenly begins to shimmer, as though waiting to respond to the next step in creation's unfolding. The world breathes quietly in anticipation, sensing without urgency that a long-awaited change has begun. Even the patterns of life above and below respond. Rivers reflect the dawn of the soft glow, hills absorb it, and the wind carries it to the edges of the world. Animals stir gently, unconcerned but alive to subtle cues. The sky, no longer entirely dark, begins to stretch in a haze of quiet color. Light enters not only to illuminate, but to prepare. It is a gentle herald, inviting readiness without forcing it. Adam's long sleep, the watchful rest of souls, the quiet attention of heaven, all of these encounter light in ways that preserve calm while stirring expectation. There is a relational quality to this illumination. It is not imposed upon the world as if demanding obedience. It enters in alignment with creation, allowing each particle, each living thing, and each resting soul to encounter it on its own terms. Time, so long suspended for Adam and others, begins to feel its edges, but not sharply. The long centuries of waiting soften into a rhythm that feels alive without urgency. Light moves gently, like a hand brushing over closed eyelids, inviting them to open slowly. The arrival of Christ, in this telling, is present not as a spectacle but as a quiet reshaping of perception. Humanity, long familiar with the shadow of absence, begins to sense continuity, a thread extending from the first man's breath to the unfolding of redemption. The light does not demand acknowledgement. It simply exists, and in existing, it begins to touch, heal, and prepare. Heaven itself seems to respond, leaning ever so slightly closer, as if stretching a hand toward earth while respecting its pace. This slow illumination changes the rhythm of waiting. Centuries of stillness, of quiet observation, begin to feel less like suspension and more like preparation. Adam's resting place, the waiting of souls in Sheol, and the distant closure of heaven all begin to shift in resonance. Awareness grows, but gently. Perception moves without urgency. The quiet that has held the world for so long begins to hum softly with anticipation. As the light continues to stretch and settle, a new rhythm emerges in the world. Days may begin to feel slightly longer, nights slightly softer, not because time itself has changed, but because perception has shifted. The long silence, once absolute, now carries a resonance, a kind of subtle music that touches every still corner of creation. Souls stirring in rest feel the gentle pulse of renewal, though not fully awakening. The world breathes quietly, prepared for what will come without knowing when it will arrive. This illumination is patient, layered, relational, and tender. It moves softly, ensuring that Adam, resting centuries below, and the resting souls, along with the world itself, sense change without alarm. Heaven, poised but not yet open, begins to shimmer. Light enters the waiting, touching every edge of creation, shaping the subtle expectation of what is to come, without demand, without fanfare, without rush. Adam, the first man, carries within him more than the memory of a single life. He holds the quiet weight of humanity itself. Every child born after him inherits traces of his story, traces not as judgment, but as a lineage of experience, of choices made and paths taken. To imagine Adam as the father of all is to sense a thread weaving through countless generations, binding each life to the breath that once rose in the garden. His first steps, his first missteps, his first encounter with mortality all ripple forward, shaping the human journey in ways both subtle and profound. Even in his fall, Adam is not merely a figure of blame. He is a mirror of human vulnerability, a testament to the way desire, curiosity, and hope can intertwine. His disobedience introduced tension into creation, a shadow that stretched across time. Yet the very act that separated him from immediate closeness to heaven also marked the beginning of something larger, the unfolding of mercy. Where failure exists, mercy finds a way to move quietly, almost imperceptibly, until it begins to reshape the consequences of error. Adam's story embodies both the weight of transgression and the gentle touch of forgiveness that can follow. The concept of Adam as father is not confined to biological lineage alone. He represents the archetype of human existence, the first to live, to err, to hope, and to wait. Every human life that follows carries the echoes of his early choices. His experience of life, of love, of fear and regret resonates silently in the hearts of those who walk the earth centuries later. It is not a burden imposed upon them, but a heritage of awareness, a quiet reminder that life is fragile, precious, and in need of both reflection and care. Redemption begins quietly in this lineage. It is not announced with trumpet calls or grand proclamations. It moves slowly, woven into the lives of humanity through mercy that surpasses comprehension. Adam's first breath and last sleep serve as points of reference, showing both the fragility and resilience of human life. His errors are remembered, yes, but they are not eternal shackles. Instead, they become a space in which mercy can enter, softening the edges of failure and illuminating paths forward. The tension between fall and healing is delicate. Adam's misstep casts a long shadow, but within that shadow lies room for growth and restoration. Humanity's collective journey is informed by the first man's experience. Every hesitation, every misjudgment, every moment of surrender carries with it a lesson whispered across generations. It is as if the earth itself remembers his life and death, and in that remembrance, it quietly prepares the world for the coming of restoration, so that mercy might not merely touch, but fully transform. Mercy overtakes failure not by cancelling the consequences, but by enfolding them in care. Adam's descendants feel the echo of his misstep, yet within that echo is a subtle invitation to seek, to hope, to participate in the unfolding of a healing story. The first man's life, even in its fallibility, demonstrates that error does not have to define the whole. Each generation becomes a canvas upon which mercy can paint, layering forgiveness over weakness, patience over impatience, light over shadow. In the depth of Adam's long sleep, there is a quiet awareness that his children's redemption is in motion. The unfolding story does not rush, but it moves, like rivers carving valleys over centuries, patient yet unstoppable. Each human act of kindness, each turn toward compassion, each moment of understanding, echoes that original breath from the garden. The lineage of Adam becomes less a chain of guilt and more a thread of potential, carrying within it the capacity for renewal. His role as father extends beyond instruction or authority. It is reflected in the way life continues despite imperfection. Every child born carries the possibility of healing not only for themselves, but also for the accumulated weight of those who came before. Adam's first error is reframed by the countless acts of mercy that follow, demonstrating that no failure is final when life itself moves toward reconciliation. This quiet shift transforms the narrative of humanity from one of despair into one of patient, unfolding hope. The imagery of Adam resting in the earth, his body folded into the soil, mirrors the work of mercy in human life. From death comes preparation for life renewed. From failure comes the space in which healing can grow. The Father of humanity is not removed from the consequences of his choices. He carries them, but in carrying them, he opens the way for their transformation. The seeds of redemption, sown in silence beneath the soil, begin to germinate in ways that time alone can reveal. Even as Adam's physical form rests, his influence extends. The moral and spiritual inheritance he leaves behind is less about strictures and more about awareness. Humanity, in observing the patterns of life, sees both the fragility of existence and the enduring capacity for mercy. In every act of forgiveness, in every attempt to restore what has been broken, Adam's legacy is renewed. His story becomes a quiet dialogue with every human heart, encouraging a slow, deliberate engagement with both failure and grace. Adam's fall and humanity's collective healing are intertwined, inseparable in the way roots and soil are. One cannot be understood without the other. Where he once stepped wrong, mercy now begins to step forward. The human story moves in tandem with this subtle shift, weaving moments of awakening, awareness, and reconciliation into the fabric of time. The Father of humanity rests, but his presence is alive in every echo of compassion, every gesture of restoration, every recognition of imperfection met with patience. In this layered reflection, Adam is both first and ongoing. He is the origin of error and the quiet witness to mercy's power. The journey of his children is never detached from his own, yet neither is it trapped by it. His story illustrates that humanity's path is never only about failure, but about the enduring possibility of reconciliation. Mercy, slow and gentle, overtakes the tremors of his missteps, showing that even the deepest shadows can be softened, and that the first breath of humanity carries with it a promise not yet fully revealed. Time, as humans understand it, folds strangely around Adam. For centuries he rested, a figure suspended between earth and eternity, his long sleep carrying the weight of beginnings and the quiet anticipation of what is to come. Yet even in that stillness, there exists the subtle pulse of possibility, the sense that the story of the first man is not closed. The narratives of resurrection, whispered in sacred texts and traditions, suggest a moment when the body and soul might reunite, when life and death meet in a final acknowledgement. Adam, the first to walk the earth, is also the first to anticipate this turning of time, where the arc of beginnings curves toward its completion. The belief in resurrection paints a vision that is neither fearful nor triumphant. It is simple, profound, and patient, like dawn slowly spreading across a darkened land. Adam's long sleep is not an absence, but a preparation for this eventual awakening. He is the first human to experience the silence of Sheol, the shadowed waiting of centuries, and yet the promise of rising again carries with it a quiet certainty. The imagery is delicate. The earth receives him fully, and yet beneath the soil, the breath of life lingers, waiting for the appointed moment to return. When that moment comes, it is as gentle as it is profound. Adam rises, not in a rush or with dramatic fanfare, but with the ease of a man stretching after a long rest. Time itself seems to pause, holding its breath, while the first human stands once more. The resurrection is not merely physical, it is the rejoining of the long-separated threads of existence. Body and spirit, once divided by death, align again. The soil, which held him tenderly for countless generations, releases him without resistance, as if recognizing that the cycle begun in Genesis is finally returning to itself. The world around him responds quietly, as though creation senses the return of its original child. Winds shift gently across plains, rivers glint differently in the sunlight, and trees stretch toward the heavens with a subtle acknowledgement. Adam's awakening does not demand attention. It simply exists, carrying with it the weight of centuries, the memory of humanity's first misstep, and the quiet resonance of hope renewed. The earth itself seems to exhale, acknowledging that the first man's story continues beyond the pause of death. The resurrection also carries a relational quality. Adam is not alone in this moment. The spirits of the faithful, those who have long waited, begin to sense the shift. They are stirred softly, feeling the alignment of divine timing and human presence. Adam's rising is a signal, not a command, and it spreads gently across the quiet realms where souls have rested. The continuity of humanity, traced back to his first breath, begins to resonate with a deeper rhythm. Each life that followed his first now senses the circle of existence completing itself, like a melody reaching its final note after centuries of quiet. Adam himself is changed by this rising. He carries the memory of fall and restoration within him, a layered understanding of mortality and mercy. To stand again is to confront the entirety of human history, the unfolding of choices, the echoes of both error and hope. There is no fear in this awareness, only a gentle recognition of the long journey from innocence to understanding. His posture, quiet yet firm, mirrors the reconciliation of beginnings and endings, the soft meeting of time with eternity. The landscape of resurrection imagery is rich with subtlety. Adam does not appear in isolation but within the context of the unfolding world. Mountains, rivers, and skies all witness his return with quiet reverence. Even the creatures of earth, long accustomed to the rhythms of life and death, sense the significance without understanding it fully. The resurrection is both intimate and cosmic, deeply personal, yet reflected in the vastness of creation. Every step Adam takes carries echoes of the first steps into the garden, and simultaneously, steps toward a fulfillment that has been patiently awaited. The act of standing again bridges centuries of separation between the mortal and the eternal. Adam, who once wandered the garden with nothing but innocence and curiosity, now stands with a quiet comprehension of the weight of choice and the patience of mercy. Resurrection is the moment when the first human fully participates in the cycle that has been set into motion, when the silence of waiting meets the gentle sound of life renewed. There is no need for applause, no requirement for acknowledgement. The act itself carries all meaning. The circle of existence, long drawn out over centuries of waiting, begins to show its form. Adam's presence reconnects threads that have stretched across time, linking the earliest breath with the ongoing story of humanity. The fallen world he left behind is not erased, but reconciled in subtle ways. The long sleep, the resting of bodies and souls, and the patient closure of heaven all meet in this moment. Adam's rising embodies the gentle completion of a cycle, where the beginning meets the end and continuity is restored without disruption. Every gesture, every movement carries weight. Adam feels the earth beneath his feet, solid yet alive, as if acknowledging the long passage of time. His breath, slow and measured, joins the rhythm of the world around him, blending centuries of silence into a present that is rich with meaning. The resurrection does not erase struggle or shadow. It incorporates them, holding them within the continuity of life, allowing the fullness of human experience to be carried forward rather than dismissed. The quiet presence of Adam at the end of time also invites reflection on the unfolding of all things. His standing is a sign not of finality, but of alignment, a gentle bridging between past, present, and what is yet to come. The earth, the heavens, the resting souls all respond with a subtle harmony. The first human becomes both witness and participant in the slow reconciliation of existence. The moment is intimate, personal, yet woven into the fabric of creation, emphasizing the unity of beginnings and endings. Even as Adam stands, there is a sense that this is part of a larger rhythm, one that moves beyond him yet includes him fully. The resurrection is not a singular event in isolation, but the quiet culmination of cycles set in motion since the first breath in the garden. The first man, now risen, embodies both origin and continuity, a living link connecting the dawn of humanity to the broader unfolding of redemption that has quietly threaded through centuries of waiting and life. Time itself seems to respond to Adam's resurrection. The boundaries between past and present blur, allowing memory and hope to coexist in the gentle light of understanding. The story of the first human reaches a resonance that was once unimaginable, as centuries of sleep and waiting culminate in the soft, profound act of standing again. It is a moment of quiet triumph, not one of spectacle, but of alignment, of the gentle completion of a circle that began with creation itself. The first man at the end of time embodies patience, endurance, and the subtle fulfillment of long-held possibilities. He is no longer simply the figure of the garden, he is the quiet convergence of all that came before and all that is yet to be revealed. In standing again, Adam carries the accumulated weight of humanity's beginnings and the soft promise of restoration, weaving together the first breath and the unfolding of eternity into a single, continuous thread. The air felt still, yet it was filled with a quiet sense of completion. Time, which had carried Adam from the first breath to long sleep, from shadowed waiting to gentle resurrection, now seemed to settle into a calm rhythm. There was no urgency, no rushing of moments, only the soft unfolding of existence into its natural place. Death, once seen as an ending, now revealed itself as something gentler, a rest, a return, a folding back into the earth that had first given life. In this stillness, there was a sense that every step, every pause, every breath that had passed through humanity had led to this quiet peace. The world itself seemed to acknowledge this transformation. Light, soft and unassuming, streamed through the horizon in a way that felt like a tender exhale. Shadows that had once seemed permanent now softened, and even the soil that had held Adam for centuries seemed warmer, more receptive, as though it understood that rest was not absence but presence in another form. The long pause between beginnings and endings had drawn to a subtle close, leaving behind a gentle resonance in the hearts of those who had listened, watched, or simply imagined the story. Life and death were no longer adversaries. They were partners in a quiet, unfolding harmony. In this moment, the first human, the father of all, had returned fully to his place in creation. Adam's presence, now intertwined with centuries of human experience, carried no weight of fear, only the echo of reflection. The mistakes of the past, the long periods of waiting, the echoes of sorrow and longing, all found themselves absorbed into a gentle tapestry of understanding. It was as if every breath he had drawn, every choice he had made, had been held carefully and respectfully by the universe, guiding it toward a serene equilibrium. In this quiet, one could feel the intimacy of life's design, where even endings carry the potential for gentle restoration. The concept of death, so long cloaked in anxiety, began to appear differently. Not a void, not a punishment, not a departure, but a gentle pause, a resting place. For Adam, this was not the erasure of identity or experience, but a folding of it into something greater, something enduring yet quiet. Life had not ceased. It had transformed, moving in rhythms that are difficult to measure yet deeply felt. Rest became a companion to humanity rather than a threat, a moment of reflection rather than a source of fear. The story that began with first breath now moved naturally into a pause where stillness was not empty and silence was not absence. The echoes of Adam's journey lingered, not as instruction but as invitation. The first human's life, fall, rest, and eventual resurrection carried subtle lessons for every listening soul. The long arc from beginnings to this final moment emphasized patience, the unfolding of mercy, and the quiet assurance that life, even when paused, continues in ways unseen. Humanity's path, traced from Adam through countless generations, felt connected through the soft awareness of this continuity. Reflection, rather than anxiety, became the natural response to the awareness of mortality, and the heart could rest knowing that endings were not final but part of an enduring rhythm. The quiet resonance extended beyond Adam to every soul who had waited, who had hoped, and who had wondered about the meaning of life and death. Sheol, the resting place, heaven, the closed gates, and the slow illumination of light now all found a harmonious alignment. The earth and sky seemed to exhale together, as though acknowledging the completion of a circle that had quietly traced itself across time. The story of humanity, long shadowed by mistakes and uncertainty, revealed itself as a journey toward calm understanding, where even the darkest pauses held the possibility of peace. The soft transformation of perception offered the listener a space to settle. There was no rush to judgment, no demand to act, no anxiety about endings. Each heart could sit with the gentle knowledge that rest is natural, that return is certain, and that silence, long filled with waiting, can become a sanctuary. The unfolding story of Adam and his children, of failure and mercy, of breath and return, now carried a sense of safety. The pause between life and death was no longer threatening. It was tender, reflective, and profoundly human. Even the smallest details carried significance. The soil that had held Adam, the light that had slowly entered the world, the quiet stirrings of heaven, all of these elements contributed to a sense of balance. Nothing was forced, nothing shouted for attention. The rhythm of the world, now aligned with the soft completion of Adam's journey, allowed for stillness that was full rather than empty. In this atmosphere, a listener could feel the continuity of life and death, the gentle assurance that everything eventually finds its rest, its return, and its place within the vast, quiet tapestry of creation. In this tender space, one could reflect on the entirety of existence with calm curiosity. Humanity's journey, traced from the garden to the long pause, from shadowed waiting to the subtle illumination of light, now felt like a conversation held softly across time. Every act of love, every moment of sorrow, every choice and consequence found a resting place within the quiet rhythm. Death, framed as rest, allowed the human heart to perceive the ongoing dance of beginnings and endings, where each breath contributes to the unfolding story, and every pause is meaningful. The silence that had once seemed empty now carried resonance. It was the quiet left behind after centuries of waiting, a stillness filled with understanding rather than void. Adam's journey, from first breath through long sleep and into the gentle awakening, invited reflection. The heart could settle into this rhythm, knowing that endings are gentle, that rest is natural, and that the story of humanity continues in soft, unbroken continuity. The first man, at the center of all beginnings, rested fully, and through him, the listener could feel the calm assurance of life's enduring flow. Here, in this quiet, there was room for reflection, for calm, for the soft understanding that life and death are partners in the story, not enemies. The world, held tenderly by the patterns of creation, seemed safe, and the heart could finally breathe without fear, knowing that every beginning finds its rest, every pause carries meaning, and silence is no longer empty.